Reunification or reconciliation? Is the island of Ireland ready to unite? Sinn Féin is renewing its push for a referendum on the issue. But has the community bridged its sectarian divide, or would a vote simply inflame smouldering tensions? We put it to our panel here on Counterpoints with me, Melinda Nusafora. 27 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, and politicians in both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland rightly applaud just how far the region has come since the Troubles.
Politics has changed, we've all moved on, the peace has been established. I think we have made enormous strides, all of us. And now we're at a point where we say, what's the next chapter? And for us, logically, in economic terms, in social terms, in democratic terms, Irish unity makes sense.
That's Republic of Ireland Sinn Féin leader Mary Lou McDonald. She's in the UK trying to drum up support for a vote on Irish reunification. The Northern Ireland Life and Times survey has been tracking community sentiments around that issue since 1998, and every year the gap between those who oppose it and those who support it is getting smaller. As of 2024, the gap was just 6%. 42% oppose uniting with the Republic and 36% support it. But when you break down who falls into those categories, old wounds open up. Of those who opposed reunification, 74% were Protestants. Of those who supported it, 68% were Catholic. So despite what Mary Lou McDonald says, not everyone has moved on. For and against British alignment still sits very solidly on religious lines. And this year's Unionist celebration of marching season in Northern Ireland reinforced that. On a particular bonfire was a message using a Catholic slur, pointing to violence against that community. It was later removed, but it's clear that for some, the sentiment remains. So, on this edition of Counterpoints, we'll ask, is reunification inevitable? Could a border poll reignite sectarian violence? And why is Sinn Féin pushing the issue now? Well, joining us to discuss the possibility of Irish reunification and the obstacles that will inevitably lie ahead is Tadhg Hickey, a comedian and political activist from the Republic of Ireland, and Jamie Bryson, Director of the Unionist Voice Policy Studies, a Northern Irish think tank. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us and welcome to Counterpoints. Well, Sinn Féin leader Mary Lou McDonald talked to the British airwaves this week to call for a reunification vote within the next 5 years. Part of her argument was that Northern Ireland isn't economically viable as a territory. But is that a good enough reason to rejoin the South? Does a stronger GDP wipe out the decades of struggle? Jamie, what do you think? Is reunification inevitable?
No, absolutely not. And I mean, if you look from 1998 onwards, from the Belfast Agreement, I'm an opponent of the Belfast Agreement, but let's just take that as a point in time to now. Sinn Féin and the Nationalist vote hasn't grown at all. The Nationalist vote for United Ireland hasn't got any bigger. In fact, it's slightly decreased. All that has happened is Sinn Féin have consolidated themselves as the largest nationalist party. Unionism has split into essentially three different parties: the DUP, the Ulster Unionist Party, and the TUV. But when you put the two blocks together, Unionism is still the by far and away the strongest. So therefore, look, there's no momentum towards a united Ireland. This is being contrived and created by Sinn Féin and Irish nationalists to cover for the fact that they're making no progress at all. Why would you not want to be part of the most successful union the world has ever seen. All the economic benefits that come from that, the economic benefits of the UK internal market, and if Northern Ireland's such an economic difficulty, why would the Republic of Ireland, a different sovereign state, want to claim it and to have it? Because they would be inheriting what, on their case, is economic difficulty. So it doesn't even make any sense on Sinn Féin's own argument.
Tyke, what do you think? Do you agree with what Jamie says, that there's no momentum, or do you see this as an inevitability?
Well, I certainly don't agree that there's no momentum. I think there's never been such a strong feeling north and south about wanting to have this debate and wanting to set up things like citizen assemblies. And that's exactly what Mary Lou McDonald was talking about. Recent polling would suggest, according to the general elections survey of 2024, that about 47% of voters in the north of Ireland under the age of 25 would like to see Irish unity. And that's the same figure, 47%, that would like to be connected to the Union, like to pursue being part of the United Kingdom, which I would say, just to a point of information on what Jamie was saying there, probably was at one point an extremely successful union, but is not economically what it once was. The empire is gone. Momentum towards a second referendum in Scotland is happening. Welsh independence voices are the strongest they've ever seen. The United Kingdom is dissolving. And I think the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland it's incumbent on him to call for a border poll if there's a likelihood of enough people in the north of Ireland wanting Irish unity. Well, if under 25s are polling at about 47%, and that's without the actual specifics of what people are voting on laid out, I would argue that there's a likelihood there right now, and certainly in the future. And that's what Mary Lou McDonald is talking about. It's incumbent on the Irish government in Dublin and the British government to start planning for unification, because just in terms of demographics, it is an inevitability. One of the founders of the DUP, for instance, has acknowledged that it's just a matter of when, not if. So I think Unionists, and particularly Loyalists, who I think Jamie, it would be fair to say is a loyalist, when there is a bit of a difference there, can stick their head in the sand as long as they want. But we would rather, those of us who would like to see United Ireland, start planning for it now and bring in those Unionist voices, because they are going to be so welcome in a new Ireland that's going to be a free, democratic, inclusive place for not just Unionists and Republicans, but people from all cultures and faith.
What do you make of that, Jamie? I mean, there was a demographic milestone that was hit in Northern Ireland. You know, it's now 45.7% Catholic and only 43.48% Protestant. I mean, even that demographic shift alone, is that not driving some kind of movement for a referendum, for a vote?
Well, the fundamental mistake in that is equating Protestant Catholic with Unionist Nationalist. Whilst that may have at one point been true, and maybe in some respects it largely has some merit, it's actually not true in its entirety. There's some of the actually strongest Unionists I know, people who come from a Catholic tradition. So it's not split along those lines, and polling has shown that now. Even on the best point, which is to say, oh, well, we can get 45% of under 25s. Well, so even taking that at its absolute height, the best point, the best demographic you possibly have, and say you isolated that, and of course in a border poll, you can't just isolate the age bracket which is most favourable to you, but let's even give them that and say, let's just isolate the most favourable age bracket. You still can't get 51%. It's still 47%. So, but the big question is this: if there's such momentum for United Ireland, why has the Nationalist vote stayed static for 30 years? There's no increase in the Nationalist vote share of Sinn Féin, the SDLP. No increase at all. All that has happened is Sinn Féin has essentially wiped out the SDLP for the most part. And just to take up the comment about the founding member of the DUP, I presume he's talking about Wallace Thompson. I mean, Wallace Thompson is viewed as somebody with no credibility in the Unionist and Loyalist community at all, a complete outlier, viewed as a bit of an attention seeker, and he is not a barometer for Unionist or Loyalist view, much less even the DUP view at all.
So, Tig,
Melinda, could I
go.
possibly ask Jamie a quick question? Would that be okay?
Please.
I just want to know, in the what I would feel the inevitability of a border poll, he would say it's not inevitable, but if it does happen, and if 51% of people north and south voted for Irish unity, I just wonder, would Jamie accept that democratic result?
Well, I've always been of the view, and I've always said that it was monstrous for the United Kingdom to enter into an international treaty which allowed one part of the territory of the United Kingdom the unilateral right to secede. And actually, there's a Supreme Court case, the Scottish case on the Scottish referendum, where the Supreme Court said there's no obligation in international law to allow any one part of a territory the right to secede. So I actually think what I'd be campaigning for is, if there's going to be a dissolution of the union, that ought to be a question for the whole union, not simply a question for one part which has been carved out. So I don't accept that the provisions in the Belfast Agreement for the border poll is legitimate. Just the way, by the way, that Nationalists never accepted Northern Ireland was legitimate at all, and look how they behaved for 30 years. No, I wouldn't accept a border poll as legitimate, because I don't accept that provision of the Belfast Agreement was ever constitutionally proper in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So I might just come back in on that, if that's okay, very briefly, just to say that then I suppose Jamie is saying that he doesn't accept democracy. So I'm not sure where we go forward from there, because I would accept democracy, and if the democratic vote was 51%, then we're talking Irish.
Well, the nationalist community didn't accept democracy. The entirety of Britain,
I don't think you're going to get a better result. I've traveled over England, Scotland and Wales doing podcasts, and the amount of people who even understand loyalist concerns or the loyalist identity is very, very slight. So I think you'd be probably better off. That's
probably down to the people you're speaking to. I mean, I go and speak to loyalist communities, and I would say nobody understands nationalist communities. Well, I mean, if you talk to an echo chamber, that tends to be what's going to happen. But if we're talking about democracy, I mean, for 30 years, the nationalist community refused to accept the democratic right of the Unionist people in Northern Ireland who had a majority to govern. We were denied the right to govern for 30 years, while the Nationalist and Republican community engaged in 30 years of terrorism. So Unionism won't be taking any lectures on democracy from Sinn Féin or nationalism at all.
I've got a question for you, Tig, actually.
Terrorism. Yeah, Melinda, sorry, go ahead.
Because we are going to come back to some of those points that you've raised in the later segment. So I just want to move us on to a point I have for you, Tig. And this push for a vote, for a border poll, seems to be coming more loudly from the south than from the north. So wouldn't that just be seen again as interference from outsiders into the daily lives of people in Northern Ireland?
No, certainly not, because I suppose the people in the south are not outsiders, as is enshrined in the Good Friday Agreement. People in the north are as Irish as I am, more so in many cases, and they not just identify as Irish, but they are Irish. There's a very big nationalist community, as we've already outlined. More than half the population would identify, I would say, as Irish. So for those of us of an Irish Republican philosophy, we're all Irish, and that's why Irish unity, I think, is not just inevitable, but it's a spiritual necessity that it happens, because Ireland's partition is relatively recent. The country's only been partitioned for 100 years, and it wasn't a split country before that. We were partitioned down the barrel of the gun from the British state. And the voices are not just coming from the south, Melinda. I have to say, just for your viewers, that I'm involved in a group called Ireland's Future, and I've been to different citizen assemblies and rallies and demonstrations and talks north and south. You're getting so many people from the north of Ireland, from a unionist background, who are more and more looking at the economics and looking at the fact that, for instance, Dublin University and Ulster University have published a study detailing the fact that for a long time, the costs of reunification have been overestimated and the benefits of reunification have been underestimated. That's their research has literally come out in the last month. So I'm at these Ireland's Future events with people from a unionist background who are now looking at Irish unity, because the writing is on the wall. They don't want to be connected to what is a failed state. They don't want to be connected to a government in Westminster that has served no one. I think the one thing that most people in Wales, Scotland, the north of Ireland and England all agree is that Westminster has failed everyone. By coming back into Irish reunification, we create a new country together. It's not about bolting one onto the other. There's an opportunity for people in the north to get back into the Eurozone and all the economic benefits that come with that. It seems to me, from my perspective, that reunification offers so much hope and progression of the future, and being connected to this Westminster government that doesn't care about Northern Nationalists or Unionists. I think most people, again, would agree with that they're going to continue being forgotten, and the North is going to continue being an economic mess, really.
See, this is the problem with Irish nationalism. It operates on the basis that Unionists are all going to wake up one day and decide, actually, we don't want to be part of the Union anymore. We want to forego our core political ideology. And I mean, it's just for the birds. And Ireland's future have these events. They invite along a couple of attention-seeking reformed Unionists, people who call themselves pro-union, but say whatever nationalism applauds in order to get them that kudos on social media and whatever else. They're not representative of the Unionist community. And here's a challenge to Ireland's future. You want to have an actual debate. You say you want to have discussions. And to be fair, we're having now a proper discussion, a proper debate, but 100%. But these Ireland's future events who say it's all about, let's have a discussion, a debate, invite me along, invite Jim Allister along. Let's have a proper discussion and debate. Don't be inviting along the type of nice, cuddly Unionist who's going to say what you want and what nationalism want to hear. The kind of Unionist who will be acceptable in your new Ireland. Invite along the likes of me, Jim Allister, and let's have a proper debate and discussion and see how we're received by Ireland's future.
Jamie, I would call you and Jim Allister cuddly, I have to say. But look.
Jamie, can you see any benefits in being part of a unified Ireland? You rejoin the European Union. Are there any positives that you can see?
I oppose the European Union, so that I oppose the European Union.
I mean, you personally may have, but I mean, there's a lot of people in Northern Ireland who see that as a very big bargaining chip.
Well, actually, you see, what we were told, and when a border was put in the Irish Sea and Northern Ireland was essentially left subjugated within the European Union, what we were told is that I don't agree with this, but what nationalism said was we now have the best of both worlds. We're part of the UK internal market, we're also part of the EU single market, and actually, again, applying their own case, if you joined the United Ireland, you would lose that dual market access, that best of both worlds. So they would actually undermine their pro-EU case. Not that I agree with it in any event, but look, here's the fundamental issue. Tag described there from his perspective as obtaining the United Ireland as a spiritual imperative, or however he put it. But as I took it, they understand it that no matter the cost, no matter the benefits or the lack of benefits either way, it's something which is a deeply held feeling that he and those who feel like him wish to achieve, come what may. And I perfectly understand that, and that's entirely legitimate. From my perspective, I am a Unionist, and I want to be, and this, some people laugh when I say this, I would rather be on the street as a Unionist than living in a gold pavement in the United Ireland. And I'm sure Tag would say he would rather be poor in the United Ireland than a rich man in the Union. And ultimately, that's the fundamental.
I'm poor either way, I'm poor.
But that's the fundamental issue here. That for a core of people on both sides, our constitutional aspirations is not about what's economically better. It's not about the cost of living. It's not about any of that. It's about who we fundamentally believe that we are, and that can't be bought. I'm never going to convince Tag that if I give him all the money in the world, that he's going to become a Unionist, and he's never going to convince me that I'm going to become a nationalist. So that's the conundrum which has been going on for 800 plus years and will continue for another 800 years.
Melinda, can I comment on that?
Please do.
I just want to say that there's no one I know who's serious in these debates who wants to see unionism vanquished, who wants to see people who believe they have a British unionist heritage, that we want those people to shut up or they're not welcome in. This is the problem, I think, and this is why people like me and others are calling for citizen assemblies, and we're calling for the Dublin government and the British government to start talking about something and planning for something that I believe is inevitable. And when we don't do that planning, we haven't set the terms. At the moment, people don't know what they're voting for. I would argue that if 47% of younger people in the North are open to Irish unity, that's an extraordinary result when the terms haven't been set. And when the terms are set, one of the options, for instance, might be something approaching a federacy, where the Stormont government in the north of Ireland might continue. But one thing for sure that I would like to see as part of my idea of a new Ireland is that if you're from a British Unionist background, that your views are utterly respected, encouraged and welcomed into this new Ireland. The idea of having some sort of united Ireland that would get rid of Unionists or would ban Orangism or would be triumphant in the way that like Green has now defeated Orange in the way that Orange one time, I would say, oppressed Green. Those days are gone. Nobody wants to see that. So Jamie he's right in he's saying, insofar as he's saying it's going to be hard to convince me to be a Unionist and it's going to be hard for me to convince him to be an Irish Republican. But I'm talking about a new Ireland that won't have those requirements at all. I'm talking about a new Ireland that builds something genuinely new together and welcomes viewpoints and traditions of all shapes and sizes, particularly Ireland North and South has a lot of immigrant population these days. We've got people from all around the world. I would believe in a new republic that would welcome and cherish all those people and move beyond the Protestant, Catholic, sectarian divides that have dogged this country of ours.
But you see, this is not logical, because to say, and this is a bit of a mind trick which nationalists play, which is to say we'll have a new Ireland. Now, and what does that mean? That means Northern Ireland becomes part of the Republic of Ireland, so that achieves their core objective. And Unionists will be welcome. What is Unionist core objective? To stay within the Union. So ultimately, you can be a Unionist. You can call yourself a Union. You can call yourself a Unionist, but you can't have the Union anymore, because we're going to dissolve the Union and we're going to create a new Ireland in which Northern Ireland will be joined with the Irish Republic. So nationalism get their core objective achieved. So this is a bit of a linguistic trick which nationalists try and play, and too many Unionists fall into it. The reality is this: Irish nationalists want to be part of United Ireland. That means Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland joined together in one sovereign territory. Unionists want Northern Ireland to be part of the sovereign territory of the United Kingdom. Those two things cannot be reconciled. You can't have both. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose, and that's just the brutal truth of it. There is no middle path. You can't share the apple, as it were.
So, Jamie, do you want the Irish Republicans and the Irish Nationalists of the North to continue losing because they want to live in an Irish Republic? They believe in Irish nationalism. And yet they're living in a state that's still controlled by Britain. So should they continue to lose as they lost for a century?
But that's politics. Politics is about one side's preference wins and another side's preference lose. That's politics. Politics is not about everybody winning, because everybody can't win, because people have different policy objectives. In this scenario, different constitutional objectives. So do I want unionism to win in terms of our constitutional objective to prevail? Absolutely, of course I do. And that means that nationalism's constitutional objective fails. That's just a practical reality.
But I would say, a point of information, that if Irish Republicans or Irish Nationalists lose in a border poll, even if it's 51 to 49, I will recognise that democratic result, because I'm interested and I adhere to democracy. Whereas Jamie, as I think he's saying that he's representative of unionism, because every other unionist that I brought up, he's described as a laughingstock. He's saying that his community will not recognise that. I think that's a dangerous place and a little bit of a threat, I would say, to democracy, to say, if we win, great. If you win, there's going to be trouble.
Well, just to be clear, I said I don't accept legitimacy of what's put in place in the Belfast Agreement. So my objective now is that I want to do away with that. The border poll provisions within the Belfast Agreement I don't see as legitimate. I see them as constitutionally improper, and I want to change them. And I want to change them to ensure that the future of the Union is a question for all the peoples of the Union. Why should a small percentage of the United Kingdom have the right to dissolve the Union? They ought not to have, and it should be a question for the whole United Kingdom. So That's a policy preference which I have, which I want to advocate for, and which I want to achieve. And if I do achieve that, then that makes a border poll much more difficult for nationalists, which I want to do. I want to make it difficult for nationalists to win. I don't want them to win. I want unionism to win and continue winning, and to win any border poll that ultimately does come. And I don't see why unionism should pretend that we don't want to win. Of course we want to win. It's politics.
And that's an interesting point that you keep making, Jamie. It's politics. It is politics. But there can only be a winner or a loser, as either of you say, and it's only politics if we get a vote. And that seems to even be in itself a sticking point. Something else that you raised, Jamie, that takes us on to our second segment, you were asking, it boils down to who we are. And there probably aren't that many places where identity is more of a complex issue than in Northern Ireland. Some people identify as Irish, some identify as British, some as both, and others as neither, but rather as purely Northern Irish. And then with that complexity comes the shared past traumas of sectarian violence. So is that far enough behind the community to not be a threat? Taig, let's start with you this time around. Could a border poll reignite sectarian or identifying violence on the island of Ireland?
It could, it certainly could. I always think that it's interesting, though, that the possibility of a border poll, when that's brought up, the reaction is always, well, that could set off loyalist violence. That could set off violence and a resumption of the Troubles, because that would be an affront to loyalists. Yet Irish nationalists and Irish Republicans are living in the north of Ireland, which is still under the jurisdiction of Westminster. So Irish nationalists and Republicans in the north are supposed to continue living in what is, by its very nature, a provocative and still on some level an oppressive rule from Westminster, because they feel like they're Irish and they're not being ruled by an Irish government at this moment in time. So I think that's interesting that we only ever look at one community's feelings when that comes up. Of course, there is that issue, but I would argue that we have come a long way on this island. That's what the Good Friday Agreement really does. It stands in history as this extraordinary. The genius of it is that it brought these communities together and it set forward a path towards constitutional change. The Good Friday Agreement was never a finished document in itself. It was never a full stop. It always had provisions in it if the situation was to change. And I think when you look at the recent polling, you look at the push, it's not happening on an official level, sadly. I've talked about that before. I think the Dublin government needs to do much more. But people up and down the country are talking about the necessity to have these conversations. And the Good Friday Agreement has enshrined in it that if there's a situation where the likelihood of that vote passing occurs, then the Secretary of State needs to call for it. If it's not passed, the Good Friday Agreement has got details in it as well, where another 7 years will pass by and then we will go again. So there's an inevitability to Irish unity that's kind of built in to the Good Friday Agreement if people read it. Should we never allow the will of the people, demographic, the will of the economists who are more and more talking about how this is an inevitability and it's going to be good for North and South? Should we not allow these people to have their day and have their say because of this sort of threat of violence or resumption of conflict? I don't think that's how democracies should work. We should never have the idea of violence being held over a democratic decision from people who want to move forward. And I'm not talking about hardline Irish Republicans. As I said earlier, you're talking about people from a unionist background who also want this. And it's not, as much as Jamie likes to characterise it, it's not just a few headbangers and lunatics from the unionist community.
I think it is.
Respected people.
So your point is,
you may know them better than me, but I think they're decent people.
I mean, well, there may be decent people as individuals. That's entirely different. You know, somebody personally. I mean, you and I might, if we ever met up, might quite like each other as individuals, as people. But I mean, we're never going to agree politically. You're going to think that I'm a headbanger politically as much as I'm going to think that you're a headbanger politically. But we might like each other personally. So, but what I'm saying is, your point seems to be that there's people who call themselves unionists who've now decided they don't want to be in the union anymore. Well, I mean, by their very definition, they're hardly unionists anymore, are they? And we can't lose sight of they can't. Well, if you're shaking your head, but the core ethos of unionism is a commitment to Northern Ireland being part of the union. Now, if you come along and say we no longer want to be part of the union, well, by definition, you can't claim to be a unionist. But just on this point about political violence, I mean, let's not lose sight of the fact that for 30 years. The Nationalist and Republican community engaged in a terrorist campaign because they did not accept the legitimacy of Northern Ireland. And the scars of that are still across the community in Northern Ireland. So I don't think that we've moved beyond that legacy. Even today, yesterday, and I think on Wednesday as well, in Parliament, there's debates going on about the legacy of the past. That's contested as well. We can't agree on the legacy of the past at all, who was right and who was wrong. We're never going to agree on that, and that's passed down generation to generation because the disagreements have never been sorted out, but they never will be sorted out because we fundamentally view the world in different ways, and that's just a practical reality. You can't reconcile that when you have two groups of people who just view the world through a different lens. And
do you think that it's dangerous, Jamie, to be pushing a reunification agenda?
Well, look, I would much rather that Nationalists and Republicans be doing it as they're doing now, with social media campaigns rather than bombs and bullets. So if they want to push, they're entitled to push for their political objectives in peaceful and democratic means, as are unionists. So I mean, I wouldn't seek to deny anybody that, or I wouldn't seek to say, well, you can't campaign for your constitutional preference. So no, I think Nationalists and Irish Republicans are perfectly entitled to campaign for their political preferences, but I'm certainly not about to facilitate it or engage in it, and I want to defeat their political objectives as they want to defeat the union. So politics is essentially war by other means. All that happened in 1998 in Northern Ireland is that the conflict shifted from being an armed conflict to an unarmed conflict. But the conflict is still raging as strong as ever. It's just in a different arena now, which thankfully doesn't see people killing each other and instead sees us have these type of debates, which of course is welcome and is positive. But it's simply political combat taking the place of violent combat.
What do you make of that take?
Can I come in on that, please? Yeah, thank you so much. So I think it's really important for me to step in, and just because Jamie a couple of times has characterised the Troubles as if there was just one side involved, as if it was just Republicans who were carrying out violence. Let us not forget that partition is only a thing because it was forced on the Irish people down the barrel of a gun. And what led up to the Troubles in the north of Ireland was that the Northern Nationalists were living effectively in an apartheid state, treated as second-class citizens, subjected to pogroms. And so when Irish nationalists and Republicans were burnt out of their own homes, Irish Republicans started about defending themselves because they were completely and utterly abandoned by the Dublin government. And obviously they had loyalist gangs in collusion with the British state terrorising their communities. So if people want to take a look at the Troubles, we have to look at it in the whole and not imagine that it came out of a cipher. It was a product of colonialism. It was a product of partition. Anywhere where people are oppressed, as we see in the world today, in the case of Palestine, they tend to fight back, and their right to fight back is enshrined in international law. The Troubles is a complicated thing. To characterise it as one side, I think, is disingenuous. In my opinion, the strongest side with most blood on its hands in the conflict in the north of Ireland is the British state and its collusion with loyalist gangs. That aside for the moment, moving forward into a new Ireland, Jamie has said a couple of times that we're kind of characterising it as if it's this, it's a logical fallacy that if you're from a unionist background, you can't be unionist anymore. I just want to say that these things are not static. The world is changing, demographics are changing, the United Kingdom, by God, is changing. At the start of the Union, the north of Ireland was the economic powerhouse of this island. Belfast was where all industry was. 100 years later, the north of Ireland is a failed economic state, and the south has traditionally been an economic powerhouse over the last 10, 20 years. Things change, and as they change, people from a unionist background can continue having a unionist background, British traditions, orange traditions, but look forward to a new Ireland. They don't necessarily, it's not a walk through the stars in their eyes and suddenly they become an Irish Republican. That's not what we require. That's not what's going to happen. Things change. For me, Irish republicanism has always been progressive. We're looking to the future. And I think there's an element in loyalism that is a little bit stuck in the past, tethered to a Westminster government that no longer cares about it. And I think it would be interesting for people in the Commons from England, from Wales, from Scotland, to respond to Jamie's point about wanting to have a border poll that includes all those territories. Do those people from those countries know much about loyalism? Do they care about loyalism? I feel sorry for loyalists in many ways, and I don't want that to come across as patronising. I think they're a little bit forgotten in this country or this entity that they're tethered to. I'm not just talking about people in my echo chamber. When I've done podcasts around Britain consistently, there is no acknowledgement or consideration of Northern nationalists or unionists. And I think that's the tragedy.
Well, can I just challenge two points? Well, firstly, I want to say no unionist or loyalist wants any sympathy from nationalists. So appreciate the kind words, but we're just fine. Thanks very much. Obviously, we entirely contest the analysis in respect of the conflict in Northern Ireland, which people from a unionist background would feel that the IRA waged a 30-year terrorist campaign. So we don't accept that. And just one other point, I noticed there the reference to Palestine. I just want to put on the record, I strongly support Israel. Israel's right to defend itself, and what is going on now in Palestine was started on the 7th of October when Hamas launched an attack, murdering men, women and children. So I don't think we can make those comparisons. I'm certainly not going to sit by and allow that to be said. Israel has an absolute right to defend itself.
Sure, but we won't get too far down that path or else we will stray off topic. I just want to ask you, Jamie, to respond to something that Tig said before we move on. Do you feel forgotten by the powers in Westminster, by people across the ditch? Are they leaving you guys to sort of fend for yourselves and maybe not giving as much as you would expect?
Well, I do believe that we've been let down consistently by British governments from as far back as 1985, who have been consistently weak on the union.
So then why do you still want to stay with them? Why not break up?
Because that is, we're not loyal to the MPs in Westminster. We're loyal to the idea of the union, to the political ideology of the union, not one government to the next. We're not loyal to the government. I have no time for the current British government. I don't think they serve the interests of anybody in the United Kingdom, let alone unionists and loyalists in Northern Ireland. But what we want to see is that's democracy. I mean, in the Republic of Ireland, you may get a government that the Tag might like one cycle, maybe a government which you do like the next cycle. So loyalty to the Republic of Ireland is not a loyalty to the Irish government, in the same way as loyalty to the Union isn't loyalty to the British government of the day. But yes, consecutive British governments have let down the unionist community and have been weak on the union. But what we need to do as unionists is to work to build those links across the United Kingdom and hopefully get MPs into Westminster who will be strong on the union. And ultimately, the key to all of this lies in Westminster. So if we can convince enough MPs, for example, that the border poll provision in the Belfast Agreement is constitutionally improper, then we can simply change that with the majority in Parliament, and that's the end of that. So that's where unionism's focus ought to be on going forward for those policy changes.
Well, it's interesting. We've sort of been touching around the edges of Brexit and those sorts of issues. So let's talk about timing of why this referendum is sort of hitting the headlines again and the road ahead. Just 9 years ago, after the UK voted to leave the European Union, the political and economic stagnation has perhaps accelerated maybe this discussion for reunification. People in Northern Ireland may have come to the conclusion that, perhaps like what you're saying, Jamie, they feel let down by British governments, and maybe they see a brighter economic future being part of the Republic of Ireland and the EU.
But they don't. Unionism is being characterised in this way. Unionism doesn't see this at all. I mean, where is this coming from? This
So
is
do
just
you think that Brexit has played no role at all in renewing or reviving or restoking discussions about reunification?
I think it was used as a battering ram to weaken the Union. In terms of Northern Ireland being left subjugated within the European Union. But if you look at the last 9 years, we were told that a vote to leave the European Union would deliver United Ireland. We're no closer to United Ireland today than we were 10 years ago. So nothing has changed. We were told the Belfast Agreement, and the Tag says one thing which I do agree with him on, which is why I oppose the Belfast Agreement. It does create a process, and a process by its very definition has to have an endpoint. And the only endpoint of the process in the Belfast Agreement is United Ireland. So it is a one-way train to United Ireland, which is why Unionism were foolish to ever endorse the whole thing. But I don't think we're any closer now to United Ireland than we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Nothing has changed. All that has changed is nationalism has done very well in Northern Ireland in terms of taking over, for the most part, large swathes of the media, very dominant on social media and in academia, and therefore is controlling what I would call, the intellectual class, and therefore is shaping the discussions. But it's a discussion within an echo chamber. It doesn't actually have any impact in the wider community in Northern Ireland. But nationalism are quite good at generating discussions. Because they've managed to get so many nationalists into positions of influence, for example, in the media and in academia, but it doesn't actually change anything in terms of moving us any closer to United Ireland.
Tyke, what do you make of that? And has Brexit played a role in this discussion?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say in terms of nationalists kind of taking over the North, as Jamie kind of puts it, that's, I think, more to do with the failures of unionism, particularly middle-class unionism. And I think Jamie himself would have to concede, he's even spoken about this quite recently. I think unionism, particularly the elites who used to run the north of Ireland, care about as much as working-class poor nationalists as they do working-class poor loyalists. That's why, in my opinion, it is a failed state, because the traditional leaders of the state have not looked after their own people, whether they're orange or green. And I think that's a big thing. Also, the Irish nationalists or Republicans in the north, they shouldn't be, in my opinion, denounced or criticised because they have made the most of a post-peace state. They have taken the funding, whatever funding they've got. When I travel up to the north of Ireland, I'm always blown away by all the new community centres and Irish language schools and various institutions. And there's a togetherness amongst Irish nationalists up there. I think that, again, that's a major factor why I believe it is an inevitability that people who are so well organised and are so dedicated and are so passionate about Irish unity will win the day, because the other side has been so factionalised and splintered. And again, that is the fault of middle-class unionists. In fact, I'd love to hear Jamie's thoughts on that. I think he's already spoken before about how they have let down loyalists. So if you believe that unionism as a monolith, as the elites have let down loyalists, if you believe that Westminster has let down loyalists, all I'm hearing about is all the different parts of being part of the United Kingdom that sucks for loyalists. Why not try something new?
Well, I number one, again, as I make the point, we're loyal to the union and the idea of union, and governments don't change that. But I do agree that there is a fundamental structural problem in unionism and loyalism, and that in the nationalist community, and fair play to them, and I don't criticise them for this, but they have taken full advantage of the last 25 years. And you see, in nationalist communities, when working class nationalists become upwardly socially mobile and enter the political class, they don't kick away the ladder, and they don't forget about where they came from. So they still stay involved in republicanism. They still stay involved in the GAA, and they're still very openly Irish nationalists, and they carry that with them into the professional class. I don't particularly like that, but why wouldn't they do that? Fair play to them. But the problem is, in unionist communities, working class people who enter the political class almost then feel as if, in order to be accepted, that they have to hide away their unionism, much less loyalism. I mean, there's nobody in the professional class in Northern Ireland would describe themselves as a loyalist, because it's just not fashionable, and it wouldn't be good for career advancement. So they hide away, they keep themselves quiet, and they almost forget where they came from. And then I think that generates some type of self-loathing and resentment, where they actually end up resenting and despising people like me more than they do Irish nationalists, because it's almost as if people like me remind them, that's where they came from, and they don't like being reminded of that because they now think they're better than everybody else. So I do agree on that point, that there's a big problem with the unionism and loyalism, whereby people from the unionist community and the professional class forget where they came from, and almost become ashamed and embarrassed about that. So we need to do something about that. I'm certainly working hard trying to do that. But I do accept that point. I think it's a valid point, and I do think that that's a structural problem which unionism has, and we need to work on going forward. There's no doubt about that.
Jamie, I also have a question for you. I'm curious, you said a little bit earlier that you think all of the UK should have a say in this border poll with regard to the reunification of the island. Well, then by extension, shouldn't then all of the EU should have had a vote when it came to the Brexit referendum? Isn't that just the same thing?
No, it's entirely different, because the European Union is not a sovereign territory. The European Union is a collection of sovereign territories which come together. The United Kingdom is one sovereign territory. So it doesn't follow, the analogy doesn't fit, because the structure of the European Union is sovereign countries come together under one umbrella to work together. The United Kingdom is one sovereign territory, so it's an entirely different analogy. It doesn't work at all.
What about the argument? I mean, I'm from Australia. If we decided to remove the king as our head of state, that's up to us to decide and not the king to decide. So why then does the UK get a say in what happens for the island of Ireland?
Well, Northern Ireland, as part of the United Kingdom, is slightly different than Australia. With all due respect, Australia is not part of the sovereign territory of the United Kingdom in terms of Northern Ireland, England, Scotland, and Wales. The more appropriate analogy would be if should Australia say, well, if Sydney wants to secede, that the people of Sydney should be allowed to secede, break away and break up Australia. I mean, would you agree with that proposition that let's give a referendum to the people of Sydney and say, well, do you want to be the People's Republic of Sydney and break away from Australia? Should one part of Australia be allowed to dismantle the whole country? That's a more appropriate analogy.
It's an interesting point. Ty, what do you make of that? Why shouldn't the UK get a say then? That's an interesting point that Jamie makes.
It's an interesting point, and I mean, strap yourself in for this, but I agree with Jamie. He's agreed with me a few times, and I'm going to give him an agree back. I would love for the poll to include England, Wales and Scotland, but I don't think, and I mean this with the greatest of respect, I don't think Jamie wants that. I actually don't think it would be a good result for his background and his philosophy. Like, Melinda, I can't stress enough the amount of times I've been in England and had conversations with the average person on the street, and they don't know which part of Ireland they still hold jurisdiction over. The fact is that England, to a lesser extent Scotland, because there's so many Irish in Scotland, particularly in Glasgow, and Wales, they don't know anything about Ireland. They don't care about Ireland. Famously, when Irish labourers went to Britain to work in the 70s and 80s, they were all paddies to the English, whether they were from the north or whether they were from the south. The tragedy, as I said, of loyalism and unionism is that England doesn't care. It never has cared about Ireland, and it's never going to care about Ireland. And at least Jamie has outlined very well that Westminster has never looked after the consideration of the north of Ireland, nationalist or unionist. I believe in a new Ireland where we do care. We do care. Jamie is not, I would never describe Jamie's generation as planters or anything like that. They've been on the island of Ireland for a long, long time. They're more Irish than the Irish themselves. Some of Jamie's antecedents would have led the Irish Republican movement in the 18th century in Ireland and brought in ideas from the American Revolution and the French Revolution. Irish republicanism was absolutely founded by Presbyterians and Protestants. So we care, we can build something together. The facts on the ground is that England, Scotland and Wales don't care. And I'm really looking forward to reading the comments on this video, because every time I've ever brought this topic up on anything I've ever done, you just get English people going, don't care, move on. It's sad. And I mean, people in the South have got used to it, but I think one of the communities in the North are holding on to an idea, as Jamie said earlier, and sadly that idea no longer exists. There is no longer the will in the United Kingdom countries to keep that kingdom together. And I think the sooner Loyalists and Unionists see the writing on the wall, the sooner we can all come together. And I also agree with Jamie, we need to start talking to the Jamies. We need to start talking to the Jim Allisters, because there is a chance that we could be guilty of talking amongst ourselves down here. But I can only speak for myself. We are very open to talking to anybody who wants to talk about the reality on the ground, which is that the demographics have changed, the economics have changed. Let's have the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
that almost seems Jamie? That almost seems like let's have a conversation, but here's the terms. There's an inevitability, about as you term it, a new Ireland, which is really United Ireland and new packaging. So come on and let's discuss about how you want to fit into that. Would you be willing to have a conversation, for example, about the UK's future? Have a conversation which is about why Northern Ireland should stay within in the Union, because Unionists.
Absolutely. 100%.
But Unionists had always expected to have these discussions on the basis of, the inevitability argument, as you say. The sooner that Unionists realise that actually they all really want to give up the Union, then we'll all be in a better place. I mean, it's just fantasy land. And I mean, listen, we all exist in some respects in our own echo chambers for the people we attract, the people we talk to. Essentially, generally speaking, is our own echo chambers. I mean, that's true of all people of all ideologies. I mean, so when you go to England, Scotland or Wales, I can assure you're going to meet people who generally are going to think a little bit like you, or you're going to attract people who are sympathetic to your views. In the same way as if I go to England, Scotland or Wales, I'm going to attract people who are sympathetic to my views. So I don't think a couple of men on the street, straw polls, is actually any legitimate barometer of how the people of the United Kingdom feel. But the Sovereign Parliament of the United Kingdom has consistently made clear that it supports the continuation of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And ultimately, that's where we are. And in my view, that's where we should remain and will remain for certainly as long as hopefully I will live.
Gentlemen, it's been a really interesting discussion. I wish we had more time, but we are going to have to leave it there. Ty Kickie, comedian and political activist from the Republic of Ireland, and Jamie Bryson, director of the Unionist Voice Policy Studies think tank in Northern Ireland. Gentlemen, we love every point of view here on Counterpoints, and we appreciate having both of you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Linda. Pleasure.
And as always, thanks to you at home for watching this episode of Counterpoints. You can, of course, catch all our latest debates and interviews by subscribing to Al Arabiya English on YouTube, and be sure to follow us on X and TikTok. Thanks for your company.